everyone. Welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire and Dr. Mike Leno. And we have two very special guests returning, especially the return of one fantastic Evan Ginzburg. Thank you for coming, and Jonathan Schwartz. So go ahead. It's great to have you back on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I wanted to have these gentlemen on, particularly together. They're part of the family, part of the team, to discuss. Both of them attended their first AEW shows recently, Evan in New York City and Jonathan in Toronto. So I'm going to throw first to Evan and let you guys go to town. Tell us your likes, dislikes, what was done right, what was the ambience like, everything.
Okay.
Your cheers and your jeers.
I will be brutally honest. I went through the park. It's Flushing Meadow Park in Queens, New York, and this was at Arthur Ashe Stadium. And as I walked through the park, I smelled tons of weed, which I'm more than okay with. But it's just my pointing out that it's a much younger crowd than many promotions. They have that audience, that very desirable 18 to 34-year-old demographic. And basically every single person I saw was sporting an AEW t-shirt. And there was a store that was just for AEW merchandise outside the venue with lines so deep, people just dying to spend their hard-earned money. And I just glanced in the store for a second, and they had a t-shirt specifically for that event at $45 a pop. And it's a money machine, AEW. The tickets are very expensive. Their Full Gear pay-per-view coming up next weekend in the same geographic area in New Jersey, $55 to $522 a ticket. Okay, wrap your head around that. $55 to $522 a ticket.
So
AEW,
like a bargain. The t-shirt seemed like a bargain at $45.
Yeah, and so was this, which was basically a glorified house show. TV show. It was a TV taping on a Wednesday night that I attended. So I don't quite get what warrants the price, particularly when I sat down in the middle of the arena, this cavernous arena. And I usually ask the question when I'm on a show, but I know this show so well, you are allowed to curse. The guy who sat next to me, a total stranger, looks at the view of the ring, which is totally obstructed by wires and a giant TV screen. And the guy looks at the ring and goes, "What the fuck?" Which is exactly my reaction when you're at a wrestling show and you can't see the ring. So I watched the entire show, which was good enough. I mean, it's a quality wrestling show on a giant TV screen. It was so big you could see microscopic life, in the water on Mars from this screen. But to me, that's not watching wrestling. That's watching a TV show. And let me just wrap it up with this. I watched the first taping, Dynamite, and at 10 o'clock, I just got up and went home. I'm like, I'm sitting here watching a TV show. I don't need to be in a park in New York, 1 a.m, which is when the show wrapped up, 1:30 in the morning, and risk my life in a park and on the subway. I'm like, I'm watching a show on a screen. See ya. And about 1,000 other people had the same idea. And I didn't even stick around for Rampage. I'm just like, I'm on my way. So the heat is off the charts. These guys are totally over. The fans love them. The fans, want to support them, want to spend their money. And I'll leave you with this, then I'll let Jonathan talk. I'll leave you with this. It didn't touch the NWA in the 80s, the Philly, Baltimore, the occasional Long Island NWA shows. Didn't touch it. Didn't touch Ring of Honor circa 2008, 9, the Nigel McGuinness era. Didn't touch it. What it is comparable to is later Ring of Honor, when WWE was cherry picking all of their talent and they weren't quite as good. That's how I would rate AEW. Would I go back? Sure. If I could actually see the ring, if I knew the seat, where I could watch a wrestling show rather than a TV show. And is it worth seeing? Yes. But it was a totally different experience. It was basically kids watching a TV show. When I say kids, just a demographic much younger than me watching a TV show.
Did they have the audacity of doing picture-in-picture while you guys were there live?
No picture-in-picture, but
everybody's doing that, Russ. It's not limited to AEW. WWE on both Raw and SmackDown do it, even particularly.
But I wondered if they would have the audacity to do it to a live show.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I just remember watching the matches on the big screen. I don't know. But Jonathan, what did you think?
So I'll actually speak to the picture-in-picture thing first, because I know Evan is a pretty strong and vocal opponent of it. I will say, for having been there live and remembering going to a SmackDown taping many, many years ago, so many years ago, Eddie Guerrero was main eventing, just to give you an idea. But when we went to that show, anytime they were kind of rearranging the sets or pulling JBL's limo out or the Mexicool's lawnmowers or anything like that, the whole show kind of stopped dead while they were kind of working the stagecraft part of it. When I went last month, you barely noticed any of that. It was basically nonstop action, bell to bell. There were the interstitial moments where you kind of would be forced to look up at the screen if they were doing backstage interviews. Renee Paquette just debuted on the show that I happened to attend. But for the most part, it was pretty seamless. And I think understanding and kind of managing expectations for it being a TV taping first and foremost, I thought that the show was really strong. There are two things that I would say. First off, this is literally the first guys' night out that I had been to since COVID. So for me and an awful lot of other people in attendance, and I think that the rules around COVID, certainly in Toronto and in Canada, were a little bit more strongly enforced than they were in the US for a bit longer. The crowd was absolutely rabid from the beginning. I mean, the enhancement matches, the dark matches, all the way through the end. People didn't even get booed. With the only people who I remember getting solid negative reactions were QT Marshall and the Factory, and that's because it's, from where I'm sitting, it's one of the many stables in AEW where they just don't really kind of serve a purpose beyond just being random antagonists to whoever happens to be up that week. But in terms of the crowd, it was hot the whole way through. Standard kind of Canadian thing where we're just not going to follow whatever the script says. We're going to cheer who we want. Very often, if there's a Canadian involved, we're cheering for that guy. Jericho got huge applause. He was working what I thought should have been the main event against Daniel Bryan, defending the Ring of Honor Championship in a really good match. They did everything they possibly could, including cutting off the Judas entry, and we just went along singing it anyway, and could not turn the man heel, despite 30 years of knowing how to work heel. Couldn't do it with us. And it was overall just a really strong show. I agree fully with Evan's comments about something magic in the air that night. But I will say one thing that I found very interesting compared to other shows that I've been to is that the crowd was overwhelmingly, like you said, that 18 to 49 demographic. I would say 80 to 90% male. And it seemed like for Toronto, and I'm sure much like New York being a pretty diverse city, it was not the most diverse crowd that I would have thought it would have been.
At $500 a ticket, it's going to limit some people.
That's true. I would also say our tickets weren't quite that bad, but I would say, again, for basically a TV taping, I would say that the price was a bar to entry. And one of the great things about wrestling is, and I think should be, that it's accessible to everybody. And I think that kind of, I wouldn't say that it took away from the experience, but I think that, if you've ever been to baseball, football, basketball, anything like that, the best fans are always in the cheap seats. The most fun is always in the cheap seats, even if the view isn't necessarily great. I mean, I have more fun sitting, at, we call it the Rogers Center now, but it's always going to be Skydome to me. I've had more fun sitting up with God in the 500 section than I have, right along first base, 3 rows in. But there are no cheap seats here. And I think that, if you're trying to democratize it and bring in a broader audience, that would have been nice as well.
Jonathan, very quickly, tell us about the bridge behind you in your backdrop, but also, did you have the visibility problems where you couldn't see the ring and therefore, like Evan, kind of watch the whole show off a big screen, or no?
So I have to give full credit to a friend of mine, Elliot Silverstein, who procured the tickets for me. He actually got us great seats. We were a little bit off center from the ring, so about halfway down the ramp. I think if you actually were to watch it, you would see me when they do kind of the pans to the audience at the very beginning of the show, just briefly. I got a whole rash of texts when that happened. So the seats were great. I will say that when the action spilled out of the ring, very often we'd kind of have to look up at the screens, but they were positioned basically at either end of what the arena would have been. There was nothing hanging over or really impairing anybody's vision of the ring itself. That said, I fully agree with Evan's comment that, you go to a live show, you want to be able to watch what's happening in the ring. And the fact that so much action winds up going outside. In the first match, there was just a blinding table spot between Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, and most of the audience couldn't catch that because it was positioned right to one camera. John Moxley came in to do an interview, and everybody's kind of looking around to see which exit he's going to come out through the crowd, and it was easy to miss that as well, if that's kind of the thing that you're after. The other thing that I found interesting and would love to hear from anybody who's actually booked a show properly is you have they brought in a good chunk of the roster to perform. But I found that a lot of them, so Wardlow, Samoa Joe, Hangman Adam Page, Mox, etc., just basically came in for really short segments, either pretty brief interviews or run-ins or that kind of thing. And I always kind of wonder, thinking of it now as an adult, what the value necessarily is in carting somebody across the border and paying for transit and having them show up and just be in the ring so briefly.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
I wound up feeling like it. Mox is in the building, MJF is in the building, and MJF's probably the best act in wrestling right now. Adam Page is in the building, and all they're doing is grabbing the mic and talking for 2 minutes.
I'll take it another step. I was at Arthur Ashe Stadium. The main event was Bryan Danielson and Moxley, and they kept cutting to MJF. So if you're watching it on the screen, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, they're cutting away from an excellent match to look at MJF smirking, making silly faces, gesturing. And I'm like, isn't the match what the camera's supposed to be on if you're being forced to watch on a screen? It was the first 2 or 3 times it was cute and everybody laughed. After a while, I'm like, I want to watch these guys wrestle. And it was frustrating to me.
And the other thing to that is, I think that part of that was a callback to an earlier feud that MJF had that I seem to remember, where he'd basically be, sitting in the audience, waiting in the wings, up in some kind of box, while the action was going on below, and the wrestlers were tearing into each other, and he could just, laugh it up. But at this point, it's the kind of thing that we'd seen before. It feels like a little bit of what's happening in AEW, given all of the instability that they've had of late, is that they're kind of trying to find their footing again, and it means kind of backtracking on a few storylines and on a few plot points. and just kind of, we're going to rear up and then go back ahead just with different people in the roles. But it does kind of seem like they're pining for a bit of a do-over in a lot of what they're doing at the moment.
I just want to watch great wrestling in a ring, not on a TV screen. I love MJF, but the guy's sitting in the crowd. I'm sitting in the crowd. I want to watch the match that's going on in the ring.
Vince McMahon's not offering me anything in 2024.
Yeah, the whole thing was a mixed bag, honestly. And had I spent big money, I didn't. I would not have walked out happy. It's a lot of money for a TV taping. And as talented as these guys are, there wasn't one match that I would qualify as being great. There were several very good matches, but it's like, one, I'm jaded to begin with, and two, I know it's a lot to ask for, but you should be able to see a ring on a wrestling show. I mean, it's a little absurd, and I'll actually break it down to you. The way the TV screen and the wiring and everything, basically you're losing 2 of the 4 corners of the ring, and basically 2 of the outside areas of the ring, if they brawl outside the ring. So you literally couldn't see the match. They throw them into a corner, you couldn't see that corner. So it's like, I have a big screen in my apartment, not as big as that, but it's a lot to ask for somebody to spend hundreds of dollars and not actually see a wrestling ring.
Ev, this is the second time they were at Arthur Ashe. Were you aware, was there any word going into their second time there, meaning your first time though, that there were visibility problems anywhere? Did you have any idea you might not be able to see the action in the ring, which is
I heard from other fans that there were certain issues, but I think, it's an exciting atmosphere. That ultimately the fans, particularly the rabid AEW fans, and I'm saying that as a positive, they're happy to be there. It's exciting. All the wrestlers are over. The angles are over. Even the dark matches, they knew everybody. They were emotionally invested. So, they're happy to be there. But I'm going to wrestling for 50 years. I'm not as excited just to be there. I want to see great wrestling. And I want to see it clearly, and it was not an ideal situation. Not to belabor the point. I mean, I hope AEW has nothing but success. I hope they're around for the next 50 years like WWE. But at the same time, there's some basics that I didn't think they pulled off. It can't just be about a TV show. There's a live audience of 10,000 plus people in there. I don't know the exact count. It was not sold out, but there was certainly 5 figures in there. So,
I think Jonathan got it kind of right, which was that, people have been inside for so long now and not being able to go to many live events. So there's just this feeling like, it doesn't matter what's in front of them. They just want to be out somewhere live and be at a show. And so I think that's the big attraction right now.
But I want to be out at a show and see the show. I don't think that's a lot to ask.
No, if you're going to go there and 99.9% aren't wearing masks, but whatever. Tell us about the dark matches for the both of you.
It was an utter waste. From 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, they had 2 3 or 4 minute matches. If you put $1 million in front of me, I couldn't tell you the result because that's how bland and quick it was. One was Ortiz and a luchador. I forget the luchador's name, and it was like 3 minutes. 3 minutes. So it's like you're sitting there for an hour. Why not put on some lengthy quality matches? Because the ticket said 7 o'clock. And between 7 and 8, you had 2, 3, or 4 minute matches. And the other was a mixed tag match. I don't even remember who it was, and because it was over in a blink. So
you said that the show ended at 1:30. So
1:30 in the morning.
Well, they tape, Russ, because they aren't doing house shows other than the quarterly pay-per-views. This is all they're doing, since the pandemic hit. And maybe Jonathan can speak more to that point. But, so if you're doing TV, you really should ensure people can see. Maybe that was.
But what I'm saying is that it's a 6-hour event, 6.5 hours.
For both Rampage and Dynamite, many do leave. They don't stick around for the Friday Rampage taping that immediately comes after. Maybe more dark matches. Maybe when do they do, guys? When do they do Elevation and the other show that are only strictly online to go view those? Are those the dark matches?
That was the dark match for. That was the dark matches for us. It was Elevation, Dark, and I forget what the other show is. In my case, they actually did the dark taping as a separate show on Thursday, which I didn't go to. So we were out by 11, give or take. What else? In terms of the preliminary matches, I was paying attention just because I also write for Slam Wrestling, and I wanted to make sure I had at least some of that down. But we got to see Kazarian and the Butcher and the Blade, who's a guilty pleasure of mine. I think they're a great tag team, and if Butcher didn't actually have another career as a musician, I think they could go a lot farther than they've been used. One interesting thing is Athena was working against a pretty popular local Toronto, Western New York talent. And for whatever reason, either there was a miscommunication and she started actually going after her opponent, or she realized that her opponent was really getting cheered, so she switched to work heel during the match and was a lot more aggressive. And apparently after the fact, she got a bit of a talking to for that backstage. I will say that one of the really cool things about going and seeing the preliminary matches, particularly, at least from my vantage point, is you get to see a lot of people on the local indie scene. So I've been following independent wrestling in Ontario and elsewhere in Canada for the better part of 20 years now. And every now and then when you see the people and I remember seeing this person in an arena with 15 other people because I'm friends with one of the guys, and now you see them in a much bigger setting. I think it's very cool. I think the biggest one like that is the Bollywood Boys actually worked a tag team match as well. And it was fun seeing those guys. They're native to Vancouver, and they actually had flown in a bunch of guys out from BC to do the taping as well.
And they were formerly in WWE.
Yeah, they were Jinder Mahal's flunkies before Shanky. They're much better at the job, I got to tell you.
Where is Shanky? Where the heck is Shanky? He hasn't been on TV.
Wherever he is, he can stay there. That was one of my first columns was looking at the rash of big men, especially in WWE, where once upon a time you had guys like Andre the Giant or Don Leo Jonathan, who were huge, but also really, really capable wrestlers as well. I mean, I can remember Andre the Giant in Montreal towards the beginning of his career actually throwing legitimate drop kicks. Now you've got guys like, Shanky, Omos, who I think has potential still, but really should not be in the ring for any length of time in anything beyond a squash match. And it's a good thing he's there with somebody who can speak for him, because he hasn't developed those skills particularly yet either. I think the best thing they could do with him is to team him up with Commander Aziz as a Nigerian version of the old Skyscrapers tag team and just have them lay waste to everybody.
Oh, God. That'd be awful. I want to throw this out there. If anybody has not seen, it's about 1974-75 in Pakistan, and it actually looks like a shoot. It's not, but it's very serious. Andre against Inoki, in of all places, Pakistan. And when Inoki died, the leader of Pakistan said it was his favorite wrestler and all this stuff. But this is a 1975 match. It's on YouTube, and everybody should go see it. If you think that Andre was maybe not as good as Don Leo or Killer Kowalski or the Giants we had, it was an exceptional match, and Andre was very athletic. Like, as he's talking about, Jonathan in Montreal for Grand Prix as Jean Ferret, where he worked with Don Leo and Kowalski and Ed Carpentier and the Blondes and Tarzan LeBoot Tyler, all of that great stuff. He had a lot of great people around him, and that was probably when he was at his best. Other than when IWE brought him in, and he was teamed with Carl Gotch and Billy Robinson for some six-mans, which was pre-Montreal. What about, let's ask you guys about the IW or All Elite's fun factor. And maybe Jonathan had more fun because he could actually see the action in the ring, as opposed to Evan, who just the line of sight, that's kind of unacceptable. But Jonathan and guys, how about the fun factor? Was it, Evan, yeah, he's been going like me for over 5-6 decades. Did you have fun at least observing all this stuff, not having to buy,
I have more fun. One of my closest friends, like Dr. Mike, is a dentist. I have more fun having a root canal over there than I did sitting in this cavernous venue watching a giant TV screen.
This is something that's.
Can you give me the laughing gas, though?
It's not just wrestling now. It's all of pro sports is kind of, with the newer arenas. They're building stuff like here in San Francisco. We have the Chase Center, and I've been there yet, but people say that the high seats that they put up there are so like you're almost standing vertically straight up. You're not even sitting anymore.
I was in the middle of the building and I couldn't see. I pitied the people behind me. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But nobody wants to build a venue now that has 10, 12,000 seats. They'd rather, cram the 18 to 20,000 seats in there. And the top level is just something you can't even see. A friend of mine who's, overweight refuses to go to see anything over at the Golden One Center in Sacramento because he said the upper seats are almost a hazard to try to get up to and sit in. It's really hard and it's getting dangerous. People are falling off of those top seats and getting really hurt because you're almost mountain climbing to get up.
It's the same view like Jonathan's backdrop there. It's like that. That's how far you are from the
bridge. Is there a marathon of people running on that bridge behind you? What is that bridge?
It looks like it. I have no idea what it is. It just was Skype gives me a bunch of random backgrounds, so I just usually pick the one that looks coolest and possibly most hazardous.
All right. Now, Jonathan, did you have fun? And B, was that the venue that AEW, now I forget the venue, was that where Hogan and Warrior met?
No. So first off, I actually had a blast, but I had a blast for two reasons. One, the company, the guys who I went with were great fun. It's a few friends who I've talked wrestling with endlessly, and we always had discussed kind of going to a show together, and that had been not possible for the longest time. So I kind of went into it with the idea that I was going to have fun. And I think part of it's just how you approach it. I knew it was a TV taping. I figured it wasn't necessarily going to be the most action-packed card that I've ever been to, but it was going to be fun, and I was going to see a lot of guys, A, whom I haven't seen in a long time, and B, who I've been looking forward to see. I never got to see Daniel Bryan since he came back, or Bryan Danielson since he came back from his neck injury, for example. I hadn't seen Moxley since he had left WWE. I think I've seen Adam Page once or twice, or Chris Jericho, or people like that. But again, it was just nice to kind of see these acts that really only existed on TV or in magazines or on the internet for me for the longest time in real life. So I was primed to have a fun evening, and the company was exceptional as well. So there was no way that, unless something absolutely, 1997 Screwjob Survivor Series level was going to happen, there was no way that I was going to leave unhappy. The other thing was, the only thing that I kind of questioned with it is they put on that really good Danielson-Jericho match about midway through the show. And the main event was going to be Orange Cassidy, who would ultimately win the All-Atlantic Championship from Pac. I get the idea that they wanted to put a title change on last. Personally, and I've written about this before, I think there's entirely too many belts floating around within AEW. I have no investment in what an All-Atlantic Championship is, especially since the Japanese flag is on it, and I thought they're more kind of Pacific than Atlantic, but geography was never my strong suit. And to me, it seemed odd that you would have two of the best wrestlers and an actual world champion fighting, and that not be the main event. and instead you had two very good wrestlers, neither of whom I would ever call remotely a threat for any kind of world championship ever, although they're both very, very good. And they had a great match, and it was very entertaining. But to me, it was also really kind of anticlimactic after what I'd seen earlier in the evening. So that's the one. To me, despite the fact that Cassidy won and the crowd was totally into him, it did seem, at least for me, a little bit anticlimactic.
What I'm hearing and what they did last week is what they did with the Usos, for example. We're switching to WWE, but the Usos New Day, they had it on first, so there wouldn't be any time issues or having to go home early or whatever. And that might be that's kind of akin to what I'm hearing out of AEW. And then leaving them with a title change is fresh on their mind because they're coming back. So let me ask you guys, would you go back? Jonathan, they're coming back soon. I'm assuming you would like to go back when they return.
Absolutely.
Ev?
I would go back if I was guaranteed, a seat where I could actually, enjoy the show and watch it, like a...
Yeah, but you're not going to pay $400 or $500 for that.
No, but if it's a media comp, they should guarantee, give him the product.
Yeah, this is Evan Ginzburg we're talking about. They should escort him to the ring.
I enjoyed. I don't want to paint a totally negative picture. I enjoyed the heat that these guys got. It felt like the NWA. It felt like Prime Ring of Honor. It felt like WWF. The fans love these guys, and the Acclaimed. Nobody gets the reaction. The Acclaimed and MJF. Those are the stars, boy. Let me tell you. And Jericho, they love also, and Daniel Bryan too. But the fan reaction is fun. These guys are totally over. And it's nice to see that.
Something I wanted to say about Jericho and him being the kind of the face of Ring of Honor, or do you feel that he is the face of Ring of Honor? He's champion, or at least he was. I haven't watched the show in a couple of weeks, but is he really bringing forward the Ring of Honor brand so much, or is he really the Jericho brand that happens to have the belt on?
Well, I understand the rationale, and I'm a big Ring of Honor mark. I would go every time they hit New York for years, and I understand he's a bigger star than the other guys. So the intentions are good. Would I rather see Claudio, or Jay Lethal or one of those guys as champ? Probably, but Jericho's an all-time great, so it does kind of elevate the brand, and he still has good matches, very good, excellent matches. It's not like he's shot at age 50. The guy's still a quality.
53, I think he's 53.
Whatever he is, yeah, 50ish, yeah.
But they need Jericho if Tony Khan is trying to get viable weekly TV for ROH. That's the point that has been put out there. That's why Jericho's champ, although you could easily do fantastic with Bryan Danielson as champ, former
one of those guys.
Okay, hang on, I'm going to interrupt on this one if you don't mind. Partly because I'm deeply disappointed in my friend Mr. Sotelo, because I wrote a whole column about this 4 weeks ago, about Chris Jericho as Ring of Honor champion and why it's a stealth brilliant move. Like we've said, Jericho brings eyes to Ring of Honor that might not.
You a softball, so you could.
I appreciate it. I will inside the park home run that one. What I will say is the brilliance of Jericho as Ring of Honor champion. First off, he brings eyes to that product that wouldn't necessarily be watching it to begin with. I think because we're all deep within, the quagmire of pro wrestling, we watch everything. We know who everybody is. We follow all the storylines. We get the importance of Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson or Nigel McGuinness or Jay Lethal. because we have that broader perspective because we've been watching and following it so avidly for so long. For people who aren't necessarily dyed-in-the-wool Ring of Honor fans or who tapped out after the company was sold to Tony Khan, I think he brings people in that wouldn't necessarily think to follow it. I love Claudio Castagnoli. I like the fact that he got a championship run. Am I disappointed that it turned out to be pretty short? Yes, but the fact is, as great an in-ring wrestler as Castagnoli is, he doesn't necessarily bring people in who aren't already rabid wrestling fans. Same thing with Jay Lethal, same thing with Grisham back when he had the title, same thing with most Ring of Honor champions, because the nature of ROH is it put wrestling first. What's great about Jericho is, on the one hand, he talks this huge game about being a sports entertainer, and basically what could be more prime alpha heel to a Ring of Honor fan than somebody who's, acting like Vince McMahon incarnate, or incarnate, as one might say. It's similar, if you think about it, to when Cactus Jack came into ECW and started doing arm bars to everybody when everyone thought that he would go hardcore, and positioned himself as a top heel just by subverting fans' expectations. In the meantime, Jericho, who's 53 years old and is maybe the oldest Ring of Honor champion, but not by much. I mean, you have to remember Christopher Daniels held the belt in his late 40s, early 50s. Jerry Lynn held the belt in his late 40s, early 50s. I mean, they've used that kind of comeback vehicle before, even within Ring of Honor. But what he's doing while he's playing this, I'm not a pro wrestler, I'm a sports entertainer, look at my flashy jackets and heavy metal theme music, is he's having 4-star matches on the regular with a series of different opponents. I mean, I'm looking forward to if he ever winds up facing Jay Lethal, although he's paired off with Jeff Jarrett and working heel himself, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. But he had a really strong match with Colt Cabana. He had a great match, I thought, with Dalton Castle, who's one of my favorites.
Excellent.
It sets him up for a really good, solid, extended run. And whoever winds up being the person who finally beats Jericho, and I'm hoping this, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a years-long reign, but whoever the person is who beats him is going to be made. And it could be Daniel Garcia. It could be somebody we haven't thought of. In a perfect world, I'd kind of wish Cody Rhodes would come back and get his comeuppance. It could be, it could be anybody from within recent history, and you have a victory not only over Jericho while he's doing some of, I would say, his best heel work, but you have it over a Jericho who's systemically beaten a series of former champions. So it actually strengthens the lineage of the belt while it puts it on somebody new ultimately. At least that's my thought.
Let me ask something quickly before we switch to something I wanted to discuss or ask your everybody's opinion about, is what kind of reaction did the women get in comparison to the men? Because that's important. And both of you guys, I'll just throw out, Britt Baker.
The dateless wonders love the women there. They just love them. It's like, it's their imaginary girlfriends, and it's the women are over, just like the men. The fans are rabid. They love all the characters, from the top of the card to the occasional, Tony's Khan squeezes them in every 3 months, whoever it may be. The fans are into this promotion, and the women as well. The women as well, and I was there the night that Saraya came back, and I don't quite understand why she's that big a star. I mean, I don't remember her having 4 or 5-star matches in WWE, but she got over like it was Charlotte Flair or whomever. The people they were like going out of their minds when she showed up. So the fans are into the women.
Good. Jonathan, on that, I don't remember which women, like if Toni Storm, who is every bit as good as any of the men there, if she was on that card, I'm pretty sure she was.
So on the card that I saw, there were a few preliminary matches that I'd mentioned. On the main card, the women's contribution was limited to Nyla Rose cutting a promo on Jade Cargill after she'd stolen the TBS championship, and Anna Jay going to challenge her on that one. I have to admit, I don't think Nyla Rose was terribly over. I think that there's some aspect to her presentation that just kind of hit as well as it might, which surprises me. I mean, she's tied with Vicky Guerrero, who's an absolute heat magnet and probably one of the best turned into one of the best female managers that I've seen. But her stuff always seems to, certainly in Toronto, it seemed to leave the crowd somewhat flat. In the ring, we got Hikaru Shida and Toni Storm beating Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter. And at least 3 of those, Toni Storm is hugely over, also a proud member of the Commonwealth, along with Britt Baker, who's, again, great heel. And there's that kind of will she or won't she turn dynamic between her and Jamie Hayter. And for some reason, organically, Jamie Hayter has gotten over tremendously in the last little while as well. One of those things that I have to admit, I don't necessarily see it, but then again, I'm not necessarily going to be the target demographic for everything. The other thing that I noticed was the Aubrey Edwards, the referee, was probably one of the most over people on the show. Anytime she came out to work a match, the crowd just went banana.
As Pat Patterson would say.
Yeah.
And interesting because she was on, reffed a bunch of undercards at Pro Wrestling Grill in LA. She was a fixture in the Pacific Northwest reffing before AEW even started. And again, AEW feels to me like a big grown-up Ring of Honor mixed with Pro Wrestling Grill. Speaking of women, well, on that point with it almost reminds me with the Britt Baker and Jade. No, they teased the breakup and then she came back to Britt Baker, but that almost feels like the Daniel Garcia doing the thing to Jericho and then returning back like a rehashed angle. I think you were talking about earlier. Some of these things feel like the repurposing angles with Jamie Hayter and Daniel Garcia. That felt very similar to me in a short period of time. If X amount of months had gone by, it might not have stood out like a sore thumb, but
I think every AEW match should have 17 people outside the ring and running into the ring also. I think it really adds to the credibility.
Well, they have to catch everybody for when they jump out of the ring.
A clean finish.
It's like when Ali was fighting Frazier and George Foreman did a run-in, it's like it really adds credibility to the sport. But
that almost happened when Biden and Trump were debating. I don't know.
Yeah. Before I forget, we were talking about Canada. Dr. Mike and I spent many hours working on this John Tolos piece for Pro Wrestling Stories. So we want everybody to read that. It features Mike's reminiscences and Mike's photographs. And we love that guy. And we're going to do a book on Tolos in 2023. I'm going to hit California sometime in January, and
with a quick preview. What is something about John Tolos that we didn't know that you're going to tell?
When I was co-running the Blassie fan club, Blassie fan club, I started the Tolos Brothers, the International Tolos Brothers fan club. They were from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Jonathan knows that area well, probably their history well. But I was running his fan club. I think that's the greatest feud ever. The greatest angle ever was Tolos Blassie in Los Angeles when Fred turned babyface after a series with the Sheik in the Blassie cage, and state-of-the-art promos, heel promos, and to a certain extent face promos. John is a treasure, was a treasure. We lost him. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, asked by his son, Chris. And Ev, I think it was like magic. You got to see our syndicated Wednesday show in New York from LA, and the guy was unlike anybody else. And it's hard to describe him to today's.
See, there's a lot of footage that's gone because they would tape over the show every week just to save money, these cheap bastards. So I'm a kid, and I'm a total mark watching Tolos, and he comes out. And he has like this glove from like the 99-cent store. And he goes, "Can I use my glove?" And I'm just like riveted. And at the same time, my father is just laughing because it's so over the top. And this guy could talk you into a seat. Oh my God. I saw him wrestle Bruno at the Garden in '74. And the guy was just dynamic, great talker. I mean, you know, Daniel Bryan could wrestle circles. Brian Danielson, however you want to call him, could wrestle circles around a Tolos, but Tolos is one of the all-time greats. I mean, the guy was just a tremendous personality, you know, brilliant gimmicks and angles and just charisma. I mean, he was a normal-sized guy, a regular-looking. He was in shape, but a regular-looking guy. And this guy would talk you into a seat and magic, like Piper. I compare him to Piper, just one of the all-time great heels. And I just love that guy with all my heart. And this article we did was 7,000 words, and we didn't even make a dent in his career because he was out there for 50 years. So we're going to expand it into a book because, and it's a labor of love. You're not going to get rich off of a book on a guy who, you know, peaked 50 years ago. But we just want to do it, and the people that will appreciate it will really appreciate it because they know how great this guy is. And I always say he's in my top 10 of all time, but I rarely see other people say the same because history hasn't been kind to him. So we think this book is long overdue. Everybody and his mother has a wrestling book. This guy deserves a wrestling book, right, Mike?
Right. And he was on the cover of, you know, after at least we would all load him up with photos, and he was on the cover of the 70s. There was no PWI. It was just the Wrestler and Inside Wrestling and the later Victory Sports Mag. John was on the cover of tons of mags. His feud with the Sheik, with superstar Billy Graham, with Kowalski, obviously Blassie. They were on the covers, or he was on many covers. And I put him up there. When he was a heel, he was like a screamer heel versus Bockwinkel, very quiet. He was an inferno volcano like King Curtis Iakea, and those are like three of the best promo guys of all time, or at least that period. Let me rush to something quickly that hit me on SmackDown, and it was so out of the blue because Wade Barrett has done such an excellent job. Thoroughly loved him in NXT, and I guess he'll be going back when the football guy gets back to SmackDown color commentary. And on that pay-per-view, the recent pay-per-view, Wade Barrett, excellent. But this dropped, and Jonathan and I were talking about it. So I'm going to read verbatim because I kept rewinding to listen to this. And I don't know if Russ even heard this, but during the women's six-man, it was an elimination thing that Shotzi Blackheart won. And Liv Morgan she's now kind of a very heelish, hardcore heelish. And I think Michael Cole said, oh, she's a weirdo. And Wade Barrett says, I'm quoting here, I'm not a weirdo, I'm straight as they come. And I had to rewind that. I go, oh, no, please. This is a nice guy. He deserves the push. Please tell me he did not say that with today's cancel culture. Now, he went online later to explain it, as Jonathan I know, saying he meant to say straight-laced, but I'm not a weirdo, I'm straight, as straight as they come. That could be, I've not seen a lot of blowback yet online. Jonathan, what have you seen to this point on that maybe people are giving him a break, you know, because he misspoke?
So I haven't seen anything, and I think that it's, even within the context of the broadcast itself, I think that if he had said something like that with different performers, I think it would have been interpreted differently. I think, for example, and we were discussing this before we went on air, Booker T, who's now handling commentary on NXT, and I have to admit I'm not a huge fan of him on commentary, was asked about the prospect of working with Quincy Elliott, who's basically working one of those old-fashioned homophobia courting gimmicks. And he basically had indicated that unless he was very strongly directed to, he had no interest in working with Quincy Elliott. He had no interest in furthering the careers or characters that were associated with the LGBTQ2+A community. He even indicated that he was uncomfortable at the time working with Goldust initially. And by that point, you know, Goldust's character had evolved considerably, and part of turning him face back in the day was disavowing him of any kind of of any of the gay imagery that he was associated with early. And Booker T still made it clear that that there was some distance between himself out of character and that community. And there hasn't been anything that's come up with him. So it was.
He had to line to explain what he meant to say, according to him. So somebody must.
I think that if Barrett had made the comments that he did in a different context, he likely would have been called out on it. But I think that what the announcers had been doing in the run-up to his remarks were really emphasizing the shift in Liv Morgan's character, that she was becoming more hardcore. Not a word I would use today either, really, but working more kind of that kind of deranged gimmick as well. And I think that his remarks were kind of intended to play off of that rather than, as he meant straight-laced. And I think that came off on camera. I noticed the terminology when he said it, but in the context of the match, didn't really raise eyebrows the way that something else might. I mean, the other thing is, we're talking about a promotion where Jerry Lawler within the last year talked about Akira Tozawa doing a ramen noodle moonsault. So it's a bit of a sliding scale to begin with.
I think they both need a 6-step program like Kyrie Irving, where they have to fulfill, all the.
Apologize to all of us.
Sorry, if Kyrie Irving's 6th step is off a cliff, I'm down with you.
Yes, I agree with that.
I really empathize with angry millionaires and billionaires like Kyrie Irving. I really I could feel their pain, and I think I hope people realize I'm being sarcastic. But
Kyrie can walk off the edge of the earth that he thinks is still flat. So that we could get rid of him that way, hopefully.
We need more selectively woke athletes like Kyrie Irving who have no problem making money off of sneakers that are done in factories where people are getting paid 50 cents an hour. That's not an issue. Everything else is an issue,
Well, he got dropped by the sneaker company.
That's right.
Maybe Adidas is going to pick him up because they got a hole in their lineup with Kanye being out.
No, they're going to still do Kanye sneakers under a different name. That's sneaky. The sneakers are sneaky.
Please tell me it's Goldberg.
Kanye West is not admitted being a wrestling fan. All right. Sammy Zayne does not go to Saudi Arabia citing his political and personal beliefs, and you got to give him respect, he and Kevin Owens, for that, because I still think that's a mistake accepting that Saudi money. But they're back in the U.S., and even though he's in this tournament and he's not having a match until I think next Friday or the Friday after that, he was not shown in the graphic. He didn't come out with the bloodline so quickly. Speed round. Jonathan, what was the deal? Why was he not on TV, not referenced other than the one brief graphic of him in the match, and they didn't connect the dots and say, oh, he's not with the bloodline because he's preparing for this very important match. They didn't say anything like that. He just wasn't with the bloodline.
So what's come out on that front is he posted something on Twitter which suggests that he actually suffered a personal loss.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that somebody close to him is either very sick or has passed away, and so he was unavailable.
Okay. It would have been nice for the announcers to say that, again, connect the dots, just makes sense. That's all we ask for, is a little bit of sense. But okay, that's to be respected. That's fine.
By the way, Sammy Zayne did an interview with Steve Austin on Steve Austin's show, and he said that the fans that did not enjoy his match with the guys from what's it called?
Jackass.
Jackass, yeah. The guy that if we did not enjoy the match with him and what's the guy's name from Jackass?
Johnny Knoxville.
Johnny Knoxville,
yeah. That we're stupid. He actually used the word stupid, which in my case would make me a moron because I didn't enjoy that match one iota, and I'll tell you why. Because lost in all of this, I used to see Sami Zayn and Ring of Honor have great matches month after month after month as El Generico. I used to see him headline with Kevin Steen, and yeah, comedy is fine, but don't lose completely the great wrestling. When was the last time you saw Sammy Zayne in a great wrestling match? He's basically doing comedy at this point. So, to say you're stupid because you didn't enjoy that, I appreciate the timing. I appreciate the, creativity of it all. But I just want to see great wrestling, and you haven't seen it from him, and there's
still that kind of like, Vince McMahonization of guys from other feds where they come in and the WWE wants to make them into jokes rather than keep them at the serious level that they were at when they came in to the WWE. And I'm not sure the WWE is still over that sort of thing where they want to.
But I think that part of that's just going to be, it's going to take time. I mean, you can't steer an ocean liner, 180 degrees in 3 minutes. I think there's momentum. I think, for example, the Saudi shows are an example of that. Before Vince McMahon had left his position, they were booked in for another 3 or 4 years, and they'd extended that contract. So unless there's a decision made to cancel it, which would be cost prohibitive to WWE, one would imagine those things are usually riddled with penalties. It's going to take a while to change that if the will is there to do so. In terms of, these are characters that have been played around with, and in some cases, Vince has, changed them up, and I agree, made them a good deal less serious, for years now. I think for a lot of them, there's a way back. I think that as great in ring as Sammy Zayne is, there's always been at least an undercurrent of humor there. And I think that's part of what makes him work so well with such a really, heavy, serious stable as the Bloodline. And he is fully capable of having a really good match. What I will say, and I wasn't a big fan. And I will say I wasn't a big fan of the Jackass thing either. I think it's a waste of somebody who, you put him. I mean, I actually even really enjoyed the tag team match he had a couple of years ago at WrestleMania, where he and Kevin Owens were featured as a tag team against Daniel Bryan in his comeback, which was smart because they could work safe around him.
A couple of years ago.
But the other thing is, if he's working an objectively silly match with Johnny Knoxville, first off, you start from that and you look where he is on the card now. There is a bit of a transition there. Secondly, much as I fully appreciate the argument from an artistic point of view, I don't necessarily feel bad that he's not doing brain busters off of a ladder if it means that he stays healthier longer. And I kind of, and I love Ring of Honor, and I love, some of the high risk stuff that they would do as well. Same way that I love ECW. I feel better when I see guys who are getting into their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s more or less in one piece. And if the price for that is you spend 6 months working a pretty silly program, I hope he got paid incredibly well for that. And that lets him bankroll whatever his next thing is going to be, because I want to see that, and I want to see him around and healthy to do it.
6 months. 6 months is not 6 years. These guys are around for years, and you rarely see them in great matches. And I love Kevin Steen, and I always enjoyed Sami Zayn. You can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You still have to come out and have great matches to impress a certain portion of the fan base. So, it's like, have Roman Reigns turn on Sami Zayn and have a 4 or 5 star match instead of just doing comedy all the time. At some point, you still have to deliver in the ring. So
I kind of think that's coming, though.
Okay.
Yeah, that is.
I do think that's where they're headed with this.
Now, Sammy had a great match with Shinsuke Nakamura not that long ago, and
that long ago?
Not that long ago, just a couple of months ago. We're closing here, so I just want to throw out kudos, though, to WWE for mentioning that Nakamura is going to have one of these last matches around the New Year with Great Muta in Japan for that particular promotion over there. They never have done that before, so that's, even though remnants of Vince still, are in place, Hunter, as they never would have done that with Vince, I don't believe, other than the Mickie James Impact thing. So, guys, let's let you plug whatever. Ev, why don't you start with the Tolos piece? Where can people go find that at Pro Wrestling Stories?
ProWrestlingStories.com, right on the main page. And yeah, check it out. And please, if you know Tolos fans, post it on their pages and spread the word. And it's a labor of love. I would guesstimate we put in 24 hours into that piece, 7,000 words. So yeah, we just love John Tolos. And it's kind of like a knife in your heart when fans go, who? Or wasn't that coach guy with Kurt Hennig? And they have no idea how great this guy was. So it's almost...
Chris, the Greek-Canadian Wrecking Crew from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Before Brett, they did the full from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. They did that with the Tolos brothers in the 50s. They would go the 3-word route, where they were, the province, the country, the city, the whole deal. And they were one of the greatest tag teams ever. Tolos brothers. Jonathan, do you recall the Tolos brothers before we let you plug away?
I have to tell you, I did not get to see very much of them. My most vivid memories are actually him working with Kurt Hennig, unfortunately, and getting the Beverly Brothers over. But I am familiar with it. I actually have taken to stealing his line, "How do you spell wrestling?" SCHWARTZ.
That's funny.
Because all wrestling is theft.
Hey, I said it. He started catchphrases, or he finessed them. There were some prior to him. He was the first guy to bring a python to the ring decades before Jake Roberts. He was one of the first to ever talk in the third person about himself. He would say, the Golden Greek is going to do this. The Golden Greek or the Maniac Tolos is going to do that. And he's talking about himself way before The Rock, third person. So,
how evil did he have to be to get Fred Blassie over as a face?
Well,
I still can't imagine that, to be honest.
That was the greatest angle. I say the greatest angle of all time, slightly edging out Zbyszko turning on Bruno. That is how good the Tolos throwing the Monsols powder, interrupting, destroying the trophy. Blassie was getting the most popular wrestler of the year award a year after he turned babyface in a 3-cage series with the Sheik. And then he renews the feud with Tolos. They had every kind of match manageable. And Tolos came up with some of these concepts, like the Roman gladiator death match that had never, occurred before.
Mike, what about when Spiros Arion made proud Italian Indian Jay Strongbow eat his feathers? That was a great turn.
There are great angles. I thought I was going to say one's better than the other, but this one and the feud leading up to the outdoor LA Coliseum show that broke gate and attendance records. They spent nearly a year showing Blassie from all the stuff Tolos did to him, and Blassie sent in all of his former tag partners, guys like Mil Mascaras, Bobo Brazil, to try to get revenge on him until he could get out of the hospital on Tolos. It was something special, and a year.
But let's let Jonathan continue to plug himself, because we are running out of time.
And then I just got to say one thing at the very end, very important.
Okay, very good. Jonathan, just tell people where they can read your contributions.
So as usual, my column goes up every 2 weeks on slamwrestling.net. It's Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz. Last week, I looked at Jade Cargill's streak in AEW and how that compares to Goldberg and Tatanka, of all people, and some of the other streaks in wrestling history, especially the Sheik, who basically went 3.5 years undefeated in Toronto until that was really anticlimactically ended as well. This coming week, I'm actually going to look at what's going on in AEW. It looks like the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega are on their way back to the roster, and scuttlebutt seems to be that CM Punk, they're trying to buy out his contract, and the question is, where does he end up? My bet, he's going to be back in WWE.
Interesting.
I would like to see CM Punk and Kyrie Irving playing on the team, like the Unhappy Millionaires.
Elon Musk can
right.
start up a Fed.
And
Twitter Fed.
There's no better way to turn a billionaire into a millionaire.
Yeah. I would be totally remiss, and Mike would say the same. We just want to acknowledge the passing of our friend Dory DeQuattro. Was an avid wrestling fan, and he was actually, when he died, he was writing a screenplay about Sputnik Monroe, and he I don't know where that stands at this point. I was working with him on that, but just a good guy. He was a professional musician. He had a big band, New York City Swing. He played my wedding. Just a dear friend, and unfortunately he passed away. Mike went with him to Japan.
Oh, he came. Yeah, he and Michelle, his wife Michelle, who I just talked to. Evan gave me your most recent contact. They went with me to Japan on one of the tours over there, January of 1991, and we had a blast. We did a lot of non-wrestling things, but we were seeing up to 2-3 shows a day because Japan, during its New Year's week, not a day there, and they'll often have like 3 shows a day, early in the morning, mid-afternoon, evening at Korakuen Hall, for example, and Osaka and some of the other venues. We had a great time. What a great guy. New York City Swing with this band, Ev. That was the band that played at your wedding.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's all that we have time for this week. Always great to have you on, Jonathan and Evan. You're always welcome to be on the show when you have time for it. When you have your book coming up later on in 2023, hopefully it'll get published. The Blackboards and I keep forgetting
wrestling rings, blackboards, and movie sets. 100 stories from my surreal life, juggling film, teaching, and pro wrestling.
We're really looking forward to that, and looking forward to having you on sometime in the near future. So until then, everybody, good night, and we'll see you all next week.
Domo.
Thank you. Thank you.